I came 2,000 miles believing someone was waiting for me, and you can't even look me in the eye." Anna Whitfield didn't shout it. She said it quietly on a train platform in Montana. With one tear she refused to let fall, running down her face, and those words hit Caleb Dawson harder than anything he'd prepared to say to her. He had $65 in his pocket, a speech, and a plan to send her straight back east. He was a man who had sworn he would never take a mail-order bride. But the moment she said those words, every wall he'd spent 8 years building developed a crack he couldn't explain. Subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the very end, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Caleb Dawson had not been to Raven Creek in 4 months. He had reasons for staying up on the mountain. Good reasons. The cattle needed watching. The fence line along the North Ridge had been breaking in 3 places since the spring thaw. The wood supply needed splitting before fall came down hard and fast, the way it always did in Montana. There was always something that needed doing on a ranch the size of his, and Caleb had spent 12 years making sure he was always the one doing it. But those weren't the real reasons, and he knew it. The real reason was simple. Raven Creek had people in it, and people had a way of looking at Caleb Dawson like he was something broken that never got fixed right. He didn't need that. He didn't need any of it. What he needed was to ride to that train station, find a woman named Anna Whitfield, put $60 in her hand, and put her right back on the next eastbound train with a polite apology and a clear conscience. His sister Sarah had done this. His own blood had gone behind his back, written to some agency in Boston, filled out papers describing him like he was livestock, at auction height, land holdings, income temperament. And somewhere a woman he had never met had packed a suitcase and bought a ticket to Montana, believing she had a future waiting for her. She didn't. Caleb had made that decision the moment he opened the agency letter 3 weeks ago. He'd read it twice. Then he'd folded it very carefully, set it on the kitchen table, walked outside, and spent the next hour splitting firewood until his shoulders burned and his mind went quiet. When he came back inside, the letter was still there. He'd written back to the agency immediately, told them there had been an error, asked them to inform Miss Whitfield that the arrangement was canceled and that he would compensate her for any inconvenience. The agency wrote back 4 days later. Miss Whitfield had already departed, which meant Caleb had 3 weeks to prepare exactly what he was going to say, and now he was standing on the platform at Raven Creek Station with $65 folded in his breast pocket, his hat in his hands, and a speech he had rehearsed enough times that he could say it in his sleep. He was going to be honest. He was going to be respectful. He was going to make sure she understood this was no reflection on her character or her worth. He was going to give her enough money to get home and enough left over to get herself settled somewhere decent. He was going to do this cleanly, the way a man handled hard things, direct, without cruelty, without drama. That was the plan. The 11:40 from Billings came in 8 minutes late, which gave Caleb 8 extra minutes to stand on that platform with the summer heat pressing down on the back of his neck and the wood smoke from the engine already drifting ahead before the train fully appeared around the bend in the track. He watched the passengers come down, a family with 3 children, the youngest one already crying before her feet hit the platform. A drummer in a checked suit carrying 2 sample cases. An older couple moving slow and deliberate, the man keeping his hand at his wife's elbow like he'd been doing it for 40 years. 2 young men who looked like they were heading somewhere they hadn't thought all the way through yet. Then the steam shifted, and Caleb saw her. She was the last one off. She came down the steps carefully, one hand on the railing, the other wrapped around the handle of a small brown suitcase that had seen better years. Her traveling dress was the color of faded cornflowers. The dust of 2 days of rail travel settled into every fold of it. Her hair was pinned up under a hat that had probably been pretty once. She was younger than he expected, mid-20s at most, and she was looking at the platform around her with the particular expression of someone who has arrived somewhere and is not entirely sure what they will find. Then he saw the tear. Just one. Running down the left side of her face. She caught it almost immediately with the back of her gloved hand, a small practiced motion, like someone who had taught herself not to cry in public and was still working on the lesson. She squared her shoulders. She looked up. And she found him. She knew him right away, probably from whatever description Sarah had put in those letters, because she walked toward him with her chin level and her eyes steady, and Caleb felt the $65 in his pocket suddenly feel like the most inadequate thing he had ever owned. "Mr. Dawson." Her voice was quieter than he expected, controlled, like she was keeping it on a short rope. "Miss Whitfield." He kept his hat in his hands. He had been raised to hold his hat when he was speaking to a woman, and some things stuck even when everything else had changed. She stopped about 3 feet from him, close enough to be polite, far enough to be careful. "I'm aware," she said, "that your expression is not what most women hope to see when they step off a train." That surprised him. He hadn't expected that kind of directness. "Miss Whitfield, you didn't ask for me." It wasn't a question. She was simply stating what she could already read on his face, in his posture, in the careful, deliberate way he was holding himself. "No," Caleb said. "I didn't. Your sister arranged this without your knowledge." "Yes." "And you came here today to tell me that?" "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her eyes, not anger, not despair, something older than both of those things. Something that looked like a woman recognizing a situation she had already been preparing herself for. "I see," she said. She turned her head slightly and looked back at the tracks where the train had already begun pulling forward, moving on toward the next stop without her. "When does the next eastbound come through?" she asked. 4 days. Her jaw tightened, just barely, just enough that Caleb caught it. 4 days. She repeated mostly to herself. "I have money," Caleb said, reaching toward his pocket. "For a room at the boarding house, and your return fare, and extra enough to get yourself settled when you get back east." She looked at his hand reaching toward his pocket. Then she looked up at his face. "Mr. Dawson," she said very quietly, "please don't." He stopped. "I'm not angry with you," she said. "You did nothing wrong. But if you take that money out right now on this platform in front of these people—" She didn't move her eyes toward the other passengers lingering nearby, but he understood. "I will have to work very hard not to feel like something being returned at a general store." Caleb put his hand back down. He felt something shift in his chest. Not softness exactly, more like the recognition of a person standing in front of him, who had more dignity than her circumstances were giving her room to show. "I'm sorry," he said. "That wasn't my intention." "I know it wasn't." She picked up her suitcase. "Is there a place I can sit and think for a moment? A diner, perhaps? Or—" She stopped. Her hand went to the side of the suitcase. Then she let it go. The suitcase hit the platform, and Anna Whitfield went down with it. Caleb moved before he thought about it, catching her by the arm before she hit the boards. She grabbed his sleeve with both hands, and he felt how cold her fingers were, even through his shirt. "I'm fine," she said immediately. "You're not fine. I just need a moment. When did you last eat?" She didn't answer. Caleb looked at her face, pale underneath the travel dust, the faint blue shadows under her eyes that weren't just from a bad night's sleep on a train. "Miss Whitfield, when did you eat last?" She raised her eyes to his, and the pride in them was considerable, but it was fighting a losing battle against something much more basic. "Yesterday morning," she said. "There was a delay outside of Billings, and I miscalculated what the journey would cost. I had enough for my ticket, and I thought—" She stopped herself, started again. "I budgeted incorrectly. It doesn't matter." It mattered enormously. She had traveled 2,000 miles on one meal and was standing on a platform in a town she'd never seen, being told to go home, and she still hadn't cried again. She'd caught that one tear, and she hadn't let another one follow it. Caleb picked up her suitcase. "Come on," he said. "Mr. Dawson, you don't need to. I'm not putting you on a train in 4 days if you collapse before you make it to the train." He kept walking toward the station exit. "There's a diner across the street. You're going to sit down and eat something, and then we'll discuss what happens next." She stood still for a moment. Then she followed him. Bed. Ida May's place wasn't much to look at, but the coffee was strong and the pie was honest. And Ida herself had the good sense not to ask too many questions when Caleb Dawson walked in with a stranger and a grim set to his jaw. She brought coffee without being asked and disappeared into the kitchen. Anna sat across from Caleb with her hands wrapped around the coffee cup and some color coming back into her face. She didn't speak right away. She was proud he could see that clearly, and accepting anything from him was costing her more than she was going to let show. "You don't have to watch me eat," she said without looking up from her cup. "I'm not watching you. I'm drinking coffee." "You're watching me." He looked out the window at the street. She almost smiled. He caught the edge of it before she brought it back under control. Ida came out with a plate. Eggs, biscuits, a thick slice of ham, and set it in front of Anna. Anna looked at it for just a moment with something so raw and unguarded in her face that Caleb made himself look out the window again. Some things a person shouldn't be witnessed eating like they were a hungry person, and a meal was an act of mercy. He drank his coffee and looked at the street and let her eat in peace. When she set her fork down, she said, "Thank you." "Ida's the one who cooked it." "You know what I mean." He did know. He didn't say anything. "Can I ask you something?" Anna said. "Go ahead." "Did you read my letters?" Caleb turned back from the window. "What letters?" "I wrote 3 letters to the agency before I left Boston. They were supposed to be forwarded to you." She held her coffee cup carefully. "I wanted you to know something about me before I arrived. Not my circumstances, I don't mean that. I meant who I was. What I was hoping for. What I was not hoping for." She paused. "I wanted you to at least know my voice before you saw my face." "I didn't receive any letters." She absorbed that. "I see." "What did they say, the letters?" She looked at him across the table. "They said I wasn't coming here to be taken care of. I'm a seamstress. I can keep accounts. I know how to make something out of very little. I've been doing it my whole life." She set down the cup. "They said I wanted to be someone's partner, not their burden." She held his gaze. "And they said that if the man in Montana had any reservations at all, I would far rather know that before I arrived than discover it on a platform." Caleb was quiet. "That's what they said," she finished. "I would have appreciated reading them." "Yes. Well." She looked at her empty plate. "It appears we've both been managed without our knowledge." That surprised a sound out of him that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but almost. She looked up at that sound, and something shifted between them just slightly, just enough to change the temperature in the room by a degree or two. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "I'm not going to pretend this situation is what either of us wanted. You clearly wanted to be left alone. And She paused, looked down, looked back up. "I wanted something I haven't found yet. That's all." She folded her hands on the table. "You owe me nothing. You don't know me. I don't know you. What your sister did was well-intentioned and completely out of bounds, and I have some sympathy for the position it's put you in. It put you in a worse one. Yes, it did." She didn't flinch from that. "But that's not your fault, and I'm not going to hold it against you." Caleb looked at her steadily. "You're not angry." "Of course I'm angry." She said it simply. "I'm furious, but not at you. And anger without a proper target is just noise." He looked at her for a long moment. "You said you miscalculated the travel costs," he said. "Yes." "How much do you have?" She lifted her chin. "Enough." "Miss Whitfield." "Enough to manage. How much?" She held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she said 40 cents. Caleb put his hat on the table. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just sat with that number 40 cents and what it meant. A woman who had packed everything she owned, traveled across the country on the strength of a letter, and a hope arrived in a town where she was unwanted and was sitting across from him with 40 cents in her pocket and enough pride to fill the whole state of Montana. "You're coming back to the ranch," he said. "I beg your pardon. Not as—" He stopped, started again. Not as anything other than a person who needs 4 days somewhere safe before she can get on a train. You can have the spare room. I'll sleep in the barn if that makes you more comfortable. Mr. Dawson, that isn't necessary. It's 4 days, he said. You're not staying at the boarding house on 40 cents, and I'm not leaving you on a platform. He picked up his hat. Those are the facts of the situation. We can argue about them if you want, but I'd rather just deal with them. Anna looked at him for a long measuring moment. You said you came here to send me back, she said. I did. And now you're inviting me to your ranch. For 4 days. Why? He thought about it honestly. Because, he said, you wiped that tear off your face, and you asked about the next train instead of falling apart on the platform. And I wasn't raised to leave a person like that standing alone. The silence stretched. Then Anna Whitfield picked up her suitcase and said, 4 days, Mr. Dawson. 4 days, Miss Whitfield. The ride back up to the ranch took the better part of 3 hours. They sat side by side on the wagon bench with the mountain air coming down cooler than the valley as they climbed, and the pine trees closing in around the road, and the whole Montana sky going wide and blue above them. They didn't talk much. That surprised Caleb, who had expected to spend the ride managing awkward questions or uncomfortable conversation. But Anna Whitfield was not an uncomfortable woman. She sat with her suitcase between her feet and looked at the mountains coming up around them and seemed to be taking everything in and saving it the way a person does when they know they won't be seeing something for long. That thought did something uncomfortable in Caleb's chest, and he ignored it. After about an hour, she said, It's bigger than I imagined. Montana. All of it. She looked at the ridgeline. In Boston, everything is stacked on top of everything else. Buildings and streets and other buildings. You look up, and there's sky and a square between the rooftops. She was quiet for a moment. Out here it just goes. Some people find that frightening. Do you? No. Neither do I, she said. That surprises me. She didn't say anything else about it, but he noticed she kept watching the mountains. They arrived at the ranch as the late afternoon light was falling long and gold across the pasture. Tom Briggs, who had been with Caleb for 6 years and kept the ranch running through the worst of winters, came out of the barn and stopped when he saw Anna on the wagon. He looked at Caleb with a question he was too smart to say out loud. Miss Whitfield will be staying in the guest room for a few days, Caleb said, climbing down from the wagon. She needs anything you find me. Clear? Clear, boss? Tom pulled off his hat in Anna's direction. Ma'am? Mr. Briggs? Anna said. Tom took one more look at Caleb that contained approximately 40 words he was saving for later, then went back to the barn. Caleb carried Anna's suitcase inside. The front room of the ranch house was what it always was, clean enough, spare, functional. A table, 2 chairs, a fireplace, books on a shelf, the kitchen through the back door. The whole place had the feeling of a house that was well maintained, but not lived in the way a man keeps things when he stopped thinking of a place as a home and started thinking of it as a place he sleeps. Anna stood in the middle of the front room and looked around. It's a good house, she said. It does the job. Someone built this with care. She touched the edge of the fireplace mantel, rough-cut stone, fitted together very precisely. Was that you? My father started it. I finished it. She looked at the stonework for a moment. He taught you well. He tried. She turned and looked at him with something careful in her expression. I'd like to be useful while I'm here, she said. I'm not able to sit idle. If there's something that needs doing, mending, cooking, whatever you need, I'd like to contribute. I don't take things I haven't earned. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Her voice was even. I want to. There's a difference. She held his gaze. I know how to cook. If you'll tell me what supplies you have, I'll start on supper. Caleb looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Pantry's through the kitchen. Help yourself. She nodded and went through to the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to make themselves useful in other people's spaces a long time ago. Caleb stood in the front room and listened to the sounds of her moving through his kitchen, the soft sound of the pantry door opening. Cupboard latches, The pump handle at the sink sounds that the house had not made in a very long time. He put on his hat and went outside to do the evening chores. He did not examine what those sounds did to the inside of his chest. Supper was better than anything that had come out of that kitchen in years. Anna had found dried beans and salt pork and some wilted vegetables in the cold cellar and done something with them that should not have been possible given those ingredients. There was cornbread. There was coffee that was strong and fresh, instead of the burned-over version Caleb usually tolerated. They ate at the table across from each other, and the evening light came through the window, and the sound of the ranch settling in for the night came in from outside. And for a few minutes, neither of them said anything, because the food required attention. Tom Briggs had been invited to eat with them. Caleb generally ate with Tom in the evenings. A habit from the lean years when company at supper was one of the few things that kept both of them going. And Tom had accepted with the kind of enthusiasm that told Caleb he had already decided Anna Whitfield was an improvement over the current situation. "Miss Whitfield," Tom said, helping himself to a third piece of cornbread, "where'd you learn to cook like this?" "Necessity," she said. "Best teacher there is," Tom said seriously. "I couldn't agree more." Tom looked at Caleb with an expression that clearly said, "You are making a mistake, and I'm going to let you figure that out yourself." Caleb drank his coffee. After supper, Anna washed the dishes. Caleb told her not to. She told him she was already doing them. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment and then accepted the situation, because she was clearly not going to stop. "Miss Whitfield," he said. Anna." The name came out before he planned it. She didn't react to it, just kept washing. "I need to say something." "Go ahead." "What my sister did was wrong. You deserved better than what happened today. The letter I sent to the agency." He stopped, started again. "I tried to cancel it in time. I didn't know you'd already left. If I had, I would have..." He wasn't sure how to finish that sentence honestly. "I'm sorry you made that trip for nothing." She was quiet for a moment, hands still in the wash water. Then she said, "Is that what it was? Nothing?" He didn't know how to answer that. She dried her hands on the cloth by the sink and turned to face him. "I'm not angry at you, Mr. Dawson. I told you that. But I also want to be honest with you about something." "All right. I didn't come here because I was desperate." She said it carefully, like she had thought about how to say this for a while. "I came here because I made a choice. I had a job in Boston. I had a room. It wasn't much, but I wasn't starving." She folded the cloth. "I came because I wanted something I couldn't find there. Not a husband exactly, or not just a husband. I wanted a life that felt like it was mine. Space, work that meant something. A place I was building instead of just surviving in." She looked at him directly. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel responsible for me. I'm telling you so you understand that I knew what I was doing when I got on that train. And whatever happens in 4 days..." She paused. "I'll be all right." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "You keep saying that," he said. "I keep meaning it." "How many times have you had to mean it?" Something moved across her face. "More than I'd prefer to count." He nodded once, slowly. "Good night, Miss Whitfield." "Good night, Mr. Dawson." He went to his room and lay on his back in the dark with his hands behind his head and stared at the ceiling and listened to the unfamiliar sound of another person breathing somewhere else in his house. He had told himself this was temporary. He had told himself 4 days. He had told himself a lot of things. He lay there and listened to his house sounding like a home for the first time in 8 years. And he thought about a woman who wiped one tear off her face and asked about the next train. And he thought about 40 cents and letters that never arrived, and cornbread that tasted like something he'd forgotten was possible. And he knew somewhere underneath all the reasons he'd built against it that 4 days was already a lie. The question he couldn't answer yet was what the truth was going to cost him. Human. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself 4 days. He told himself the walls he'd built were still standing. By morning, Anna Whitfield had already found the cracks. Caleb was up before dawn. That was nothing new. He had been rising before the sun for as long as he could remember, first because his father expected it, then because the ranch demanded it, and finally because sleep past 4 in the morning had stopped being something his body was willing to do. There was always work. There was always something that needed doing before the day got away from him. But that morning he came out of his room quietly, moving differently than usual, aware in a way he hadn't been in years that there was another person in the house. He made coffee without clattering the pot. He noticed he was doing it and felt faintly irritated at himself. The kitchen still smelled like last night's supper beans and cornbread and something warmer underneath it that he didn't want to name. He drank his coffee standing at the window and watched the dark outside begin to separate itself into shapes. The barn, the fence line, the tree line on the ridge, and told himself this was simply a temporary arrangement, and the fact that his house smelled like food and felt less like a held breath than it usually did was irrelevant. Then he heard her. Not a sound exactly, more like a presence. The particular quality of air in a house that changes when someone else is awake in it. He turned around. Anna was standing in the kitchen doorway, in a plain gray dress, her hair not yet pinned, hanging loose past her shoulders. She was holding her shoes in one hand. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "I thought you'd still be asleep," he said. "I thought the same about you." She came in and sat down at the table and began putting on her shoes. "How long have you been up?" "A while. There's coffee." He got her a cup without thinking about it. Set it in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it the same way she'd wrapped them around the cup at Ida May's the day before, and the familiarity of the gesture did something peculiar in his chest that he addressed by going to look out the window again. "You don't have to be up," he said. "You traveled 2 days. Sleep." "I slept." She tied her second shoe. "What needs doing this morning?" "Nothing that requires you." "Mr. Dawson?" Her voice was patient the way a teacher is patient with a student who keeps making the same mistake. "I told you last night. I don't sit idle. Tell me what needs doing or I'll find it myself, and you might not like what I find." He turned around. "What does that mean?" She looked up at him calmly. "It means I noticed your account ledger on the shelf in the front room last night, and I have a feeling about what I'd find if I opened it." Caleb went very still. "You're not touching my accounts." "I'm not going to touch them. I said I had a feeling." She drank her coffee. "But I spent 3 years as a bookkeeper for a textile firm in Boston before the firm collapsed. Numbers don't lie to me the way they lie to most people." She set down the cup. "I'm not trying to involve myself in your business. I'm just telling you what I can do." He looked at her for a long moment. "How old are you?" 26. "You ran accounts for a textile firm at 23. At 21. She said it without any particular pride, just accuracy. "I started young." He wanted to ask more. He told himself he didn't need to know more. "The chickens need feeding," he said instead. "Feed buckets by the back door." She stood up. "Is that all?" "For now." She took the feed bucket and went out the back door, and Caleb stood in his kitchen and drank his coffee and listened to the sound of her moving across the yard. And he thought about a woman who ran accounts at 21 and traveled 2,000 miles on 40 cents and still had the composure to ask whether there was anything else she could do. He thought about that ledger on the shelf. He thought about the column he hadn't been able to make balance since March. He went outside to start the morning chores before he did something that couldn't be undone. By the time Tom Briggs arrived at the barn, Anna had already fed the chickens, found the egg basket, collected what the hens had left overnight, and was making a case to the barn cat, who was watching her from a fence post with aristocratic indifference, that he would be better served by catching mice than by looking decorative. Tom watched this for a moment. "Cat's name is General," he offered. Anna glanced at him. "He has a general's opinion of himself. I was just informing him the rank doesn't exempt him from duties." Tom bit down on a grin and went to find Caleb. He found him in the north pasture checking the fence line, the same fence line he'd been checking every morning for 6 weeks without fixing it, which Tom had long understood was less about the fence and more about having somewhere to go when Caleb Dawson didn't want to think about something. "She's a worker," Tom said, falling into step beside him. "4 days," Caleb said. "Right. That's the arrangement." "Sure, boss." "She's leaving on the Thursday train." "Course she is." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then carefully, "That ledger keeping you up?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "The ledger's fine. The ledger hasn't balanced since before Easter, and we both know it." Tom kept his voice easy, the way you spoke to a man who was looking for a reason to be angry. "I'm not saying anything about her specifically. I'm just saying that if someone happened to be here who knew something about accounts, it might be worth the conversation." "Drop it, Tom." Dropped. They walked in silence. Then Caleb said, "She ran a textile firm's books at 21. Tom said nothing. He was a wise enough man to know when silence was the most powerful response available. 4 days, Caleb said again, but it sounded less certain than it had the first time. The trouble with Anna Whitfield. Caleb discovered over the next 36 hours was that she didn't make herself easy to ignore. It wasn't that she was loud about it. She wasn't. She was, in fact, one of the quieter people he'd been around. She didn't fill silence with noise, didn't chatter to make herself feel more present, didn't demand attention the way some people did when they were uncomfortable in a place. She simply moved through the ranch with a kind of calm competence that made itself impossible to overlook. She fixed the hinge on the kitchen cupboard that had been half off for 2 years. Not by asking him to do it by finding the tools herself, asking Tom where he kept them, and taking care of it while Caleb was out in the pasture. He came in for the midday meal and the cupboard door swung clean and even, and he stopped in the kitchen and looked at it and felt something that was half gratitude and half the specific irritation of a man who'd been planning to fix something and has just been quietly shown that he hadn't. She reorganized the pantry. Not dramatically, she didn't throw anything out or rearrange it beyond recognition. She simply put things in order so that you could see what was there and what was running low. Small things, practical things, things that made the house work better without making any noise about it. And she cooked. Caleb had not realized until someone else was cooking in his kitchen how long he had been eating to survive rather than to eat. Not bad food, he wasn't incompetent, but functional food. Food with no particular interest in being anything beyond fuel. Anna cooked like she believed a meal was worth the attention, and every time he sat down at the table across from her and Tom, it ambushed him a little. "You're going to ruin my appetite for my own cooking," Tom told her on the second evening. "Your own cooking ruined your appetite for your own cooking," Anna said. "I've seen what's in that pot you keep behind the barn." Tom pointed at her. "That's a private stew." "It's a biological event." Caleb made the sound that was almost a laugh again. It happened faster this time, and it stayed a little longer. Anna caught it. She didn't say anything about it, but he saw the corner of her mouth move. That night, after Tom had gone, and the supper things were cleared, Anna was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea when Caleb came in from doing the final round of the outbuildings. She had a piece of paper in front of her, and she was writing on it in small, neat columns. Caleb stopped. "Is that my ledger?" "No." She turned the paper slightly so he could see it. It was a blank sheet she'd found somewhere, not his books. "I was just working out something I noticed." He came closer despite himself. The paper had 2 columns, numbers in each. "What is that?" "Your feed costs versus your cattle count." She said it without looking up. "I wasn't prying. Tom mentioned the herd size when we were talking this morning, and I saw your feed receipts on the nail by the back door." She paused. "You're overpaying." He looked at the paper. "What?" "By about 18%. She set down her pencil. "I don't know who you're buying from, but whatever price they're giving you, Henderson's Mill in Bozeman would come in lower for the same quality. I used to process invoices for a supply company before the textile firm. I know those numbers." She looked up at him. "I'm not telling you what to do with your ranch. I'm just telling you what I see." Caleb stared at the columns. 18%. Over a year, over a herd, his size that was not a small number. "I've been buying from the same man for 6 years," he said. "Sometimes loyalty costs more than it's worth." He pulled out the other chair and sat down. He looked at the columns. He looked at her handwriting, small, precise, clear. "Show me." She walked him through it. She didn't perform intelligence about it, didn't make him feel foolish for not having seen it himself. She just showed him the math the way a person shows you a path through the woods, clear and practical, and without drama. By the time she was done, Caleb was looking at the paper and doing the arithmetic in his head and coming up with numbers that made his jaw tight. "That's 3 years of overpaying," he said. "At minimum," she said. "I don't have your older records." "I have older records." She looked at him. He got up, went to the front room, and came back with the ledger. He set it on the table in front of her. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. "I thought you didn't want me touching your accounts." "I don't want you touching them." He sat back down. "I want you to look at them. There's a difference." That almost smile again. "Is there?" "Just look at the damn ledger, Anna." She pulled the book toward her and opened it, and the kitchen was quiet for a while, except for the sound of pages turning and the scratch of her pencil making small notes on her paper. And Caleb sat across from her and drank his coffee and watched her face while she worked the slight narrowing of her eyes. When something caught her attention, the small, precise frown, when a number didn't match what she expected, the moment when she stopped and went back 2 pages and looked again at something she'd passed, and he recognized somewhere underneath everything he'd been telling himself for 2 days that he was watching someone who was genuinely good at something, and that it had been a very long time since he'd had someone like that within arm's reach. She worked for 20 minutes. Then she set down her pencil and looked up at him. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "someone has been cheating you." The silence that followed that statement had a particular quality to it. The kind of silence that comes not from nothing being said, but from something landing too squarely to respond to immediately. "Say that again," Caleb said. "I'll show you." She turned the ledger toward him and put her finger on a line in the March accounts. "This entry here, $50 credited for a cattle sale to Hale Ranch on the 14th. She moved her finger. "But here in February, there's a note in different handwriting someone else made this entry showing $68 owed from that same sale. The difference was never recorded as received. My foreman before Tom handled the books, Gerald Webb, left last year. Did he leave or was he let go?" Caleb's expression shifted. "He left. Said he had family in Oregon." "Did you verify that?" Caleb looked at the ledger entry. Something was happening behind his eyes, the particular look of a man recalculating something he thought he already understood. "How much?" he said. She had already done it. "Over 18 months, I'm seeing discrepancies that add up to somewhere between $400 and $600. I'd need to cross-reference against your receipts to give you an exact number." She kept her voice level. "I could be wrong. There could be legitimate explanations for some of these. But taken together, the pattern is," she chose the word carefully, "consistent. Consistent with someone stealing from me." "Yes." Caleb sat back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling. "Gerald Webb," he said. "Just the name. Quiet." "I'm sorry," Anna said. "I know this isn't what you expected to find tonight. What made you look?" The balance on the first page was off by exactly $40. She said it simply. That kind of round number discrepancy is usually intentional. Accidental errors are messier. He looked at her. "You found that in 20 minutes. I've been looking at books like this for 5 years. You learn to see it." Caleb stood up. He moved to the window and stood there with his hand on the frame, looking out at the dark, and Anna waited. She didn't fill the silence. She just waited, giving him room to process it, the way a person processes finding out something about their life that changes the shape of things they thought they understood. "There's a man in town," Caleb said finally. "Victor Hale. He's been trying to buy my land for 3 years. Gerald Webb was friendly with his foreman." He stopped. "I thought it was just Gerald being social." Anna was very still. You think this is connected to Hale, she said. I think a lot of things just started looking different. He turned around. His face was controlled, but his eyes had the particular sharpness of a man who has just reorganized a series of events into a new pattern and doesn't like the picture they make. Victor Hale offered to buy this ranch last spring. I said no. 3 months later, my books are short by $400, and my foreman has left for Oregon. He looked at the ledger. That's an interesting sequence. It is, Anna said. Though it's a sequence, not evidence. You'd need more than a ledger to prove intent. I know. He came back to the table. But right now, I need to know exactly how much is missing. Can you do that? She looked at him steadily. I'll need the receipt file, and I'll need time. How much time? A day, maybe 2. 2 days. He was already past the 4 he'd allocated in his head. She wasn't pointing that out. He wasn't going to either. The receipt file is in the box under the front room shelf, he said. She nodded. I'll start in the morning. He picked up the ledger and then, after a moment, put it back down in front of her. Keep it tonight, if you see anything else. She put her hand on the cover of the book. Thank you for trusting me with it. Thank you for seeing it in the first place. He said it plainly without making a thing of it. Then he went to the door and stopped. Anna? Yes. I'm glad the letters didn't get here in time. He didn't wait to see what that did to her face. He went to his room and closed the door quietly and lay down in the dark again. And this time, the thing he stared at the ceiling thinking about was not 4 days or walls or the careful distance between 2 people who had just met. He thought about a woman who found a round number discrepancy in 20 minutes and delivered the news of it gently, and waited without filling the silence. He thought about what kind of person learned to do that. He thought about what kind of life teaches a person to be that careful with someone else's hard moment. And somewhere in the thinking, without his permission, the 4-day wall quietly became something he couldn't find the edges of anymore. Morning came, and with it a visit Caleb hadn't expected. He heard the horse before he saw the rider, a big gray, the kind that cost more than most men earned in a season. And he came out of the barn to find Victor Hale dismounting at his fence gate, like he owned the approach, if not yet the property. Victor Hale was 50 and knew it, and spent considerable effort pretending otherwise. He was broad and well-dressed, and had the particular manner of a man who had been told yes so consistently that the word no had become more of a novelty than a genuine obstacle. Dawson, he said, with the expansive warmth of someone who has decided that friendliness is the most effective kind of pressure. Beautiful morning. Hale. Caleb came to the gate but didn't open it. I wasn't expecting you. Unannounced visit, I know. I apologize. I was riding this direction anyway, and I thought... Victor's eyes shifted past Caleb toward the house where the kitchen window was bright with lamplight, and the faint sound of movement was audible even from the gate. His expression changed, just slightly, just a fraction of careful surprise. I heard something in town, about a visitor. Word travels fast. Raven Creek is a small town. Victor looked back at him with the particular interest of a man filing information. I heard a woman came in on the Tuesday train, that she came out here. You heard right. A mail-order bride, they're saying. Caleb kept his face still. People say a lot of things. Victor smiled. It was a practiced smile, the kind that meant something different than what it showed. I just wanted to make sure you're not in over your head, Caleb. Taking on a wife is a considerable commitment. A woman from the East. He said it with a faint emphasis, the kind that was technically just a description, but doesn't always understand what ranching life costs, what it takes. I appreciate your concern. I'm serious, Caleb. If things get complicated financially or otherwise, my offer on this land still stands. I've been very patient about it. You have, Caleb said, and I've been very consistent about my answer. Victor looked at him for a moment. Then his gaze moved again to the house, to the lit window, to whatever story he was assembling behind those steady eyes. Well, he said, easy and pleasant. "The offer doesn't expire. You know where to find me." He remounted. "Give my regards to your guest." He rode away, and Caleb watched him go, and felt the particular cold that comes not from weather, but from understanding something you'd rather not understand. He went inside. Anna was at the table with the ledger and the receipt file open in front of her, cross-referencing entries in 2 columns, her tea gone cold beside her elbow. She looked up at the sound of the door. "Who was that?" she asked. "Victor Hale." She went still. "Already?" "Already." She looked at him, and he looked at her, and they were both thinking the same thing, that Victor Hale had ridden out here within 24 hours of hearing there was a woman on the ranch, and that a man who had been patient for 3 years and was now moving in 24 hours was a man who had decided something was changing. "How much did you find?" Caleb said. $472, she said. "Confirmed. There may be more in the older records. And the entries, the handwriting. Is it Webb's? On some of them?" She turned the ledger to face him and pointed. "But on these 3, she indicated 3 entries in the past 6 months. "It's not. It's someone else's hand." Caleb looked at the entries, at the dates. "Those are after Webb left," he said. They looked at each other. "Mr. Dawson," Anna said quietly, "I think someone still on this property has been making entries in your books." The morning light was full now, coming through the kitchen window, and outside, Caleb could hear Tom's voice in the yard, directing the 2-day workers who came on Thursdays, and the sound was familiar and ordinary. And suddenly everything familiar and ordinary had a question mark sitting beside it. "The only people with access to this house," Caleb said very carefully, "are me, Tom, and Gerald Webb when he was here." "And whoever Gerald Webb let in," Anna said. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down. He spread the ledger entries in front of him and looked at 3 lines of numbers that had been placed there by someone who had been inside his house without his knowledge and had been helping themselves to what was his. He thought about Victor Hale on his gray horse at the gate, about the way Hale had looked at the house, about 3 years of patience and an offer that didn't expire. "I need to go to town," he said. "To the sheriff. To the land records office, first." He stood up. "If Hale's been taking my money, this ranch is the reason, and if the ranch is the reason, there might be more than money involved." Anna was already stacking the papers in careful order. "Do you want me to come?" He looked at her. Sitting at his kitchen table with his ledger and his receipts, having found in 2 days what he'd missed for 18 months, asking if he wanted her to come with him. "It's not your fight," he said. She looked back at him steadily. "Mr. Dawson, someone stole from you. I found it. At this point," she set down the papers, "it feels like it might be a little bit my fight, too." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Get your coat," he said. She stood up and went to get her coat, and Caleb watched her go, and thought about the fact that 2 days ago he had stood on a train platform with $65 in his pocket and a plan to be alone again by Thursday. Thursday was tomorrow. He hadn't mentioned it. She hadn't either. And somewhere between the ledger and the receipt file and 3 lines of someone else's handwriting in his books, the Thursday train had quietly slipped from both their minds, like something that had never quite been real to begin with. The Land Records office in Raven Creek was run by a man named Elias Pruitt, who had held the position for 19 years, and approached every inquiry with the specific combination of slowness and suspicion that comes from spending 2 decades watching people try to find reasons to take things away from other people. He looked at Caleb over the top of his spectacles. Then he looked at Anna. Then back at Caleb. "Ranch records for the Dawson parcel," he said. "That's a significant request." "It's my ranch," Caleb said. "It shouldn't be a significant request. I need to find the file." "Then find it." Pruitt disappeared into the back room with the unhurried pace of a man who had decided that urgency was other people's problem. Anna stood beside Caleb at the counter and didn't say anything, but her hand moved to the folded papers in her coat pocket. The ledger summaries she'd copied out that morning in her careful columns, and he saw her press them slightly, the way a person confirms something is still there. "You all right?" he said quietly. "I'm fine." She said it the same way she'd said it on the platform 2 days ago, and he recognized now what he hadn't recognized then, that it was armor, not assurance. That I'm fine was the sentence she put in front of herself when she was walking into something that might not be fine at all. Anna! She looked up at him. Whatever we find in those records, he said, I want you to know something. What? You didn't have to do any of this. The ledger. Coming today. None of it. He kept his voice low. You could have sat in that guest room for 4 days and waited for your train. I wouldn't have thought less of you. She held his gaze for a moment. I know, she said. That's not the kind of person I am. I'm starting to understand that. She looked at him with something careful and steady in her eyes, the particular look of someone deciding how much of a thing to say. Then Pruitt came back from the rear of the office carrying a thick brown folder, and the moment closed over itself. Pruitt set the folder on the counter. He opened it with the deliberate care of a man who wanted everyone to see that he was being thorough, and began spreading documents across the surface. Caleb leaned in. He found what he was looking for on the 3rd page. An application for land survey reassessment, filed 4 months ago, with the signature of the filing party on the bottom line, Gerald Webb. Caleb straightened up slowly. What does a survey reassessment do? He asked. Pruitt glanced at him over the spectacles. Technically, it opens the parcel to boundary review. If a neighboring landowner has evidence of historical encroachment, disputed fences, unclear deed markings, a reassessment allows them to petition for a formal boundary hearing. And during that hearing, the original deed is examined. If there are irregularities, such as, Pruitt hesitated. He was looking at the folder now with the expression of a man who had just understood something about why this particular request had been filed in the first place. Such as a discrepancy in the original land purchase, unpaid taxes, disputed, transfer the parcel could theoretically be placed in receivership pending resolution. And who filed for the boundary petition? Caleb said. After Webb filed for the reassessment. Pruitt turned to the next document. Anna got there first. Her finger landed on the name before Pruitt had finished turning the page. Hale Ranch, she said, quietly, without any particular inflection, the way you say a thing that doesn't surprise you, but confirms something you needed confirmed. The 3 of them stood around the folder. Caleb looked at the petition, at the date, at Gerald Webb's signature on the reassessment application, at Victor Hale's attorney's name on the boundary petition that followed 6 weeks later, neat as a trap snapping shut. How long does a boundary hearing take? Caleb asked. Pruitt looked deeply uncomfortable. Months, possibly longer if the filing party requests extension. And while the hearing is pending, can the land be sold? A pause. Not easily, but the original owner's ability to secure credit against it to expand to the practical effect is a cloud on the title. Most banks won't lend against a parcel in active dispute. Caleb straightened up. The full shape of it was visible now. Steal from the ranch until the finances were stretched. File a fraudulent survey dispute to cloud the title. Wait for Caleb to run short on credit and operating funds. Then arrive with an offer that was the only available exit. 3 years of patience. 3 years of building a machine designed to leave Caleb Dawson with no options except the one Victor Hale was offering. Can this petition be challenged? Anna asked. Pruitt looked at her. He had been looking at her the way men looked at women who spoke with authority in official offices, with the specific uncertainty of someone who hadn't decided yet whether to be dismissive or taken aback. The ledger summaries she produced from her coat pocket made the decision for him. She laid them on the counter. The boundary petition is based on Gerald Webb's survey reassessment application. Webb was employed by Caleb Dawson. These are records showing that Webb was also defrauding Mr. Dawson during the same period, misappropriating funds and making unauthorized entries in the ranch accounts. If his employment was obtained under false pretenses, or if he was acting as an agent of another party while employed here. She looked at Pruitt steadily. Then the survey reassessment he filed on behalf of a ranch he was being paid to defraud is not a legitimate document. It's part of the fraud. Pruitt stared at her. Then he looked at Caleb. "Who is this woman?" "She's with me," Caleb said. Pruitt looked back at Anna's ledger summaries. He picked one up. He was quiet for a full 30 seconds reading. "These would need to be submitted formally," he said finally, "accompanied by an affidavit, and they'd need to be reviewed by the territorial court before they could be used to challenge a pending petition." "How do we submit them?" Anna asked. "There's a form. Can we do it today?" Another pause. Pruitt looked at the ledger summaries. He looked at the boundary petition in the folder. He was a man who had watched a great many documents pass across his counter for 19 years, and he appeared to be performing the particular arithmetic of a person who has just understood which side of something he wants to be on. "I can have the form ready in 20 minutes, he said. They were outside the records office an hour later. Caleb had the challenge documents in hand, properly witness stamped, entered into the official log. It wasn't a victory, not yet. Pruitt had been clear about that. The territorial court would need to review, there would be hearings, it would take time. But the petition was now formally contested, and Victor Hale's attorney would receive notification within the week. The machine had a stick in its gears. Caleb stood on the boardwalk in front of the office and looked at the documents in his hand, and felt a complicated mixture of cold fury and something that was almost not quite, but almost relief. Anna stood beside him. She had her coat buttoned against the morning chill, and she was looking down the main street of Raven Creek, with the expression of someone who has just done a hard thing and is letting the adrenaline of it settle. "You knew about the survey application," Caleb said. "Before Pruitt showed us, you knew what to look for." "I knew what kind of scheme this was the moment you mentioned Hale had been patient about buying your land for 3 years, she said. "Patient men with money and lawyers don't just wait out of goodwill. They wait because they're building something." She pulled her coat tighter. "I've seen it before. In Boston, the textile firm I worked for, the man who bought it when it failed had been quietly buying up our supplier contracts for 2 years beforehand, making sure we'd fail on schedule. What happened to the people there when the firm went under?" "Most of them lost their work." She paused. "I lost mine." He looked at her. "That's why you left Boston?" "That's one of the reasons." She said it simply without making it large. When the thing you've built your life around collapses, you can either rebuild in the same place or go somewhere you can build something different. She glanced at him sideways. "I chose different." They walked toward the wagon. The morning had shifted into midday, and the town around them was running at its usual pace, and Caleb was aware in the particular way you become aware of how you appear in a town where people know you that he and Anna were being watched. Not aggressively, just the quiet, constant attention of a small town taking inventory of something new. He had lived in Raven Creek for 12 years. He knew every face. Most of them were decent people. But some of them would talk, and some of them would talk to the wrong people, and Victor Hale was clearly a man with good sources. He was thinking about that when he heard the voice. Caleb Dawson. He turned. Wade Mercer, one of Hale's men. Not his foreman lower than that, but the kind of man who was never too far from Victor Hale's business. Broad, deliberate, with the careful posture of someone who had been told to do a thing and was calibrating how to do it in public. He was looking at Anna. "This the mail-order bride," he said, with a smile that had nothing friendly in it. Caleb took one step forward, very controlled. "What do you need, Mercer?" "Just being neighborly." Mercer kept his eyes on Anna. "Mr. Hale was wondering if you'd given any more thought to his offer. Said to tell you the price might not stay where it is indefinitely." He tilted his head, the gesture of a man delivering a rehearsed message. Said a man with complications, financial complications, let's say, or legal complications, sometimes finds that the best offer is the one still on the table. "Tell Hale I'll be in touch when I have something to say to him. He was hoping for sooner than that." "Tell him anyway." Mercer finally shifted his eyes from Anna to Caleb. Something in Caleb's expression apparently informed him that the pleasant part of the conversation was concluded. He nodded once and moved off down the street. Caleb turned back to the wagon. Anna was already walking. Her pace was steady. Her chin was level, and she didn't say anything until they were at the wagon, and he was helping her up to the bench, and then she said quietly, and without looking at him, "He was trying to rattle me." "Yes." "Did it work? Did it look like it worked?" She settled onto the bench. "I've been rattled by better men than Wade Mercer." He climbed up beside her. "Is that supposed to be reassuring?" "It's supposed to be accurate." He made the sound that was almost a laugh. It came easier now. He noticed came faster and clicked the horses forward, and they moved off down the main street of Raven Creek, with the afternoon light falling flat and warm across everything, and Anna sitting straight-backed beside him, with her hands in her lap, and the composure of someone who had decided a long time ago that dignity was the one thing she would not let be taken from her. He drove for a while in silence. Then he said, "Mercer called you my mail-order bride." "I heard him. You didn't react." She was quiet for a moment. "It doesn't matter what Wade Mercer calls me. It matters to me." She turned her head and looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, but he felt her looking, felt the weight of her attention, the way you feel a change in temperature. "Why?" she said. He didn't have a clean answer for that. He had the truth, which was more complicated than a clean answer. He'd been working his way toward it for 2 days now, circling it the way a man circles something he knows is there, but isn't quite ready to touch. "Because how people talk about someone in this town follows them," he said finally. "And I don't want what Mercer said to be the story people tell about you here." She was quiet for a moment. "What story would you want them to tell?" He thought about it honestly. "The one that's true." She turned back to the road. Neither of them said anything else for a while, but the silence had a different texture than it had before. Warmer, more deliberate. And Caleb was aware of how close she was on the bench. Aware of it in a way he hadn't let himself be aware of anything in a very long time. They were 2 miles from the ranch when Tom came riding hard toward them down the road. Caleb knew from the pace of the horse that something was wrong before Tom was close enough to see his face. He pulled the wagon to a stop. Tom drew up beside them. His face was tight and his hat was pushed back, and he had the look of a man who had been moving fast for long enough to be worried about something real. "Boss," he said, "you need to come back now." "What happened?" "Hale's men, 3 of them, came to the north fence about an hour ago. Said they were doing a survey check. Danny and Pete were up there the day workers, and they said the men had papers. Official-looking papers." Caleb felt the cold settle in his chest again. Survey papers. Something like that. Danny didn't know what they said. He told them to leave, and they did, but... Tom looked at the ridge in the distance. "Pete tracked them when they rode off. Boss, they went on to the north pasture, moved 2 of your cattle markers. The deliberate quality of it. The morning visit. The reassurance that the offer was still on the table. And while Caleb was in town at the records office, Hale's men were on his land moving markers. Not waiting for the legal process to work. Moving ahead of it. Creating physical evidence to support the boundary claim before the court challenge could gain traction. "How far did they move them?" Caleb said. "Pete said about 40 feet into your north boundary line." 40 feet. In the context of a land dispute, 40 feet with a moved marker could look like a long-standing claim, could be photographed, could be presented to a court as physical evidence of historical use. Anna beside him was very still. He could see her working through it the same way he was. "Is Pete up there now?" Caleb said. He stayed to watch. "And the markers?" "Still moved. I didn't want to touch them until I talked to you." Caleb thought for 2 seconds. "Ride back and stay with Pete. Don't move anything. And Tom?" Tom was already turning the horse. "I need you to find Reverend Alcott. He's the closest thing to an impartial witness this town has. Ask him if he'll ride up to the north pasture tomorrow morning to document what the markers looked like when we found them. The preacher as a witness. Courts respect clergy, and Hale can't accuse Alcott of being in my pocket." Tom nodded and rode. Caleb looked at the road ahead for a moment, then at Anna. "Hale moved faster than I expected. he said. He knew you'd been in town, she said. Mercer wasn't just delivering a message, he was keeping you occupied while his men were on your land. She said it very precisely, not with anger, but with the flat clarity of someone identifying a mechanism. He timed it. Caleb felt something tighten in his jaw. The sheer deliberateness of it. The architecture. This was not a man acting impulsively. This was someone who had been running a plan for 3 years and was now accelerating it because something had changed, because a woman had walked into the ranch and found what was in his books and filed a challenge at the records office, and Victor Hale had understood that his window was closing. We changed his timeline, Caleb said. Yes. Anna held his gaze. Which means from here, it moves fast. He turned the horses and drove toward the ranch. That evening, Caleb's sister Sarah arrived. He had not sent for her. She appeared at the door just as the sun was going down, having ridden from her place 12 miles east in the kind of purposeful hurry that told him someone had talked to her in town. She was 32 and had her mother's coloring and her father's obstinacy, and the specific expression of a woman who had done something she believed in and was not going to apologize for it, but was prepared to defend it at length. She stopped in the doorway when she saw Anna. Anna looked up from the table, where she had the ledger spread out again, making a clean copy of her summary, with notes organized for the territorial court. For a moment, the two women looked at each other. "You're Anna," Sarah said. "You're Sarah," Anna said. "I wrote those letters." "I know." Anna looked at her steadily. "Sit down. There's coffee." Sarah looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back at her with the expression he had been saving for this conversation since approximately 3 weeks ago. "Caleb," she started. "Sit down," he said. She sat down. He told her. All of it. The ledger, Webb, the survey application, the boundary petition, Hale's men on the north pasture, Mercer in the street, Anna's work at the records office. What was filed, what was challenged, what was still at risk. Sarah was quiet through all of it. She had the Dawson trait of holding very still when she was alarmed, going quiet rather than loud, and by the time Caleb finished, she had gone very still indeed. "Webb," she said. "I hired Webb. You were up on the ridge that spring, and you needed a foreman, and I put him in touch with you." She was looking at the table. "He was recommended by someone in town. I didn't verify, I just—" She stopped. "Who recommended him?" Anna said. Gently, not accusingly, just the precise question. Sarah looked up. Her eyes moved to Anna's face, and something shifted in them, a recognition maybe of a woman who asked the exact question that mattered, without making you feel small for not having asked it yourself. "Chester Bird," she said. "He works at the feed store. I didn't think—" She stopped again. "Chester Bird is friends with Hale's foreman." The room was quiet. The whole machine visible at once now. Every gear, every connection. Chester Bird recommending Webb to Sarah. Sarah trusting him because she trusted Chester. Caleb trusting him because Sarah vouched for him. Webb inside the ranch, inside the books for 18 months. "Sarah," Caleb said. His voice was controlled. "I'm not angry at you." She looked at him. "You're furious at me. I'm furious at Hale. That's different." He held her gaze. "What you did writing to the agency, I was angry about it. I'm still not sure how I feel about it. But—" He stopped, and his eyes moved briefly involuntarily to Anna, and then back to his sister. "That's a separate thing." Sarah watched that small movement. Something in her face changed. The defensiveness shifted into something quieter and more wondering. She looked at Anna. "Are you all right?" she said. "Coming all this way and finding all of this?" "I'm all right," Anna said. "You're not angry at me." Anna considered it. "You were trying to help your brother." She picked up her pencil. "I find it hard to be angry at that." Sarah looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Caleb. "I like her," she said. "I know," Caleb said. "Does she know you like her, Sarah?" "I'm just asking." "Get some coffee and stop asking." Sarah got up and got her coffee, and Caleb heard her laughing quietly in the kitchen, the first laugh in his house in longer than he wanted to count, and he sat across from Anna, who was writing her clean columns in the lamplight and not looking at him, but who had the corner of her mouth doing the thing it did when she was holding something back. "She's not subtle," Anna said. "She never has been." Is that a family trait? He thought about that. About standing on a train platform 2 days ago with $65 and a speech. About a ledger. About a land records office, and a form stamp, and the sound of a gavel making something official. "No," he said. "I've been told I'm very subtle." She looked up at him, and this time she didn't hold back the smile. It was a real one, full and unguarded, and exactly what her face looked like when she wasn't watching herself. And it lasted 3 seconds before she brought it back under control and looked at her papers again. 3 seconds. It was enough to rearrange several things inside Caleb Dawson's chest that had been sitting in their positions for 8 years. That night, with Sarah asleep in the front room and Anna working late at the table, Caleb came back from the final check of the outbuildings and stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "You should sleep. Soon. It'll keep until morning. I want to have it clean before the court date." She didn't look up. "If we get a hearing in the next 30 days, we need this organized so a judge can understand it in 5 minutes. Judges don't like reading long documents. How do you know what judges like?" "The textile firm dispute went to arbitration. I prepared the documents." She turned a page. "We lost anyway, but the arbitrator said our paperwork was exemplary." Caleb leaned in the doorway. The lamp was burning low, and the house was quiet, and outside the Montana night was doing what it always did, going deep and wide and full of stars, and he thought about exemplary paperwork prepared by a 23-year-old for a case she lost, for a firm that folded in a city she ultimately left, and all of that bringing her here to this table in his kitchen at 10 o'clock at night, fighting for a ranch she had no obligation to fight for. "Anna," he said. Why are you doing this?" She stopped writing. She set down her pencil, and she looked at the papers in front of her for a moment before she looked up at him. "Because it's right," she said. "That's not a complete answer." She held his gaze. "Because it's yours," she said. "This ranch, what you've built, what your father started and you finished." She paused. "Nobody should have that taken from them by a man like Victor Hale." He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "You came here for a new beginning," he said. "That's what you told me on the platform." "Yes. Is this what you had in mind?" She held his gaze, and the lamplight made everything warm, and her eyes were very steady, and she said, "No, it's better." He straightened in the doorway. He wanted to say something. He had words available, he could feel them, but they were the kind of words that once said, changed the position of everything, and he wasn't ready. He hadn't figured out yet whether ready was something he was capable of anymore. So he said, "Don't stay up too late," and went to his room. He lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about 3 seconds of a real smile and the word better, and outside his window, the night was enormous and full of stars, and tomorrow, Victor Hale's attorney was going to receive a notification, and the gears of something large and dangerous were going to begin turning in earnest. He thought about all of that. He thought about it for a long time, and underneath all of it, steady and impossible to argue with, was the knowledge that 4 days had come and gone, and the Thursday train had left without her, and neither of them had said a single word about it. The notification reached Victor Hale's attorney on a Friday morning. Caleb knew because by Friday afternoon, Wade Mercer was back at his gate. This time he didn't bother with pleasantries. "Mr. Hale wants a meeting," Mercer said. "Tomorrow. His office in town. He says it's in your best interest to come before this goes any further." Caleb was repairing the water trough near the barn. He didn't stop working. "Tell Hale I'll consider it." He wasn't asking. Caleb set down his hammer and looked at Mercer with the particular patience of a man who had decided exactly how much he was willing to be pushed. "Then tell him I'll consider his non-question and send word." Mercer's jaw tightened. He looked past Caleb toward the house the same way he'd looked in town, with the same studying quality that had nothing casual about it. His attorney says your challenge has some problems. The affidavit you filed, the court's going to want independent verification of the ledger discrepancies. A witness who isn't connected to the ranch. That's being arranged. Is it? Mercer's eyes came back to him. You've had some help with all this, I hear. Your guest. My guest's name is Miss Whitfield, and you'll use it. A beat of silence. Mercer recalibrated something. His attorney also says that if the woman is involved in filing these documents, her standing to do so might be questionable. She's not your wife. She has no legal stake in this property. Anything she's submitted could be challenged on those grounds. Caleb kept his face completely still. Because Mercer was right. That was the thing about it. Mercer was right, and both of them knew it, and the particular smile that moved across Mercer's face was the smile of a man who has just placed something unpleasant directly in someone else's path and watched them see it. Good afternoon, Mercer, Caleb said. Mercer rode away. Caleb stood at the water trough for a moment, with his hammer in his hand, and the particular cold feeling of a problem that had just changed its shape. Then he went inside. Anna was at the table. She'd been at the table most of the morning organizing the court submission into the clear, logical order she'd been building for 3 days. She looked up when he came in. She read his face before he said a word. What happened? She said. He told her, flat and direct, the way he told her everything, because he'd learned inside of 4 days that she didn't want it softened, and she didn't need it softened, and softening it was actually an insult to her intelligence. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. He's right, she said. I know. I have no legal standing here. I'm not your wife. I'm not your employee. I'm not even a formal witness. I'm a person who was staying in your house and happened to look at your books. She set her pencil down. Any document I've submitted can be challenged on the basis that I had no authority to access the records in the first place. You had my permission. Your permission isn't the same as legal authority. She folded her hands on the table. Hale's attorney is going to argue that you gave a stranger access to your private financial records, that she acted without formal standing, and that the challenge to the survey reassessment is therefore irregular. She paused. It might not hold up, but it creates delay, and delay is what he wants. Caleb sat down across from her. He looked at the organized papers between them, 3 days of her work, meticulous and clear, and built with the kind of care that told him she understood exactly what was at stake. What do we do? He said. She looked at him steadily. There are 2 options. The first is to find an attorney who can formally take over the submission and file it under proper legal authority. That takes time and money, and Hale's people will oppose every step. And the second. She held his gaze. The second is to remove the standing problem entirely. He understood what she was saying. He understood it completely, and the understanding moved through him like cold water, not unpleasant exactly, but clarifying the way cold water clarifies things that were previously blurred. Anna, I'm not suggesting it, as I'm not asking for anything. She said it quickly, clearly. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I am telling you it is a legal option that would resolve the standing question entirely, and I'm telling you as a practical matter, not as... She stopped. Started again. It's a solution. What you do with it is your decision. The kitchen was very quiet. Caleb looked at the woman across from him. At the organized papers. At the work of 3 days. At the careful distinction she had just drawn between a solution and an ask. You came here for a new beginning, he said. You keep coming back to that. I keep thinking about it. She looked at him. Why? Because I want to know if this... He gestured a small motion that encompassed the table and the papers and the ranch, and the last 5 days is the beginning you were looking for. It wasn't what I imagined, she said carefully. What did you imagine? I'm not sure. She looked at her hands. Something quieter, maybe. A man who needed someone to cook for him, and manage his household, and a simple life. She was honest about it, not romantic. I thought maybe simple was what I needed after Boston. But, she looked up. But nothing about you is simple, Caleb Dawson, and I've discovered that I don't actually want simple. She held his gaze. I want real. He sat with that. A week ago, he said, I was standing on a train platform, planning to put you on the next eastbound. I remember. I had $65 in my pocket and a speech. I remember that too. And now I'm sitting in my kitchen at 4 p.m, discussing whether my legal best interest involves marrying a woman I've known for 5 days. The corner of her mouth moved. When you put it that way, it sounds somewhat chaotic. It is somewhat chaotic. Yes. She looked at him directly. It is. And I understand if that's... I'm not saying it as a complaint, he said. She stopped. He leaned forward with his forearms on the table and looked at her with the directness he used when he'd made a decision and was done circling it. I'm saying it as a fact. Because I want to ask you something, and I want to ask it clearly, not wrapped in legal arguments or practical solutions, and I need you to know that those are separate things. She was very still. Anna. He kept his eyes on hers. Do you want to be here? Not in the house, not on the ranch. She understood the question. Yes, she said, without hesitation. Not because of Hale, not because of the papers. No, not because of those things. Because of what then? She looked at him for a long moment. Because I have watched you for 5 days, and I know what kind of man you are. Not from what you've told me very little. From what you've done. How you spoke to me on the platform. How you said nothing while I ate at Ida Mae's. How you gave me a room and told me you'd sleep in the barn. She paused. How you told me you were glad the letters didn't arrive in time. She held his gaze. I know what kind of man does those things. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I haven't said anything about what kind of man I am in 8 years. I know. The woman I was going to marry, the one who left. He stopped. He had told Anna almost nothing about this. The one evening he had come close, he had pulled back, and she had let him pull back. She said I was too hard, too closed, that living with me was like living next to someone and never being let in. Was she right? Probably. He looked at the table. I built walls, and I called them self-sufficiency. I stayed up on this mountain, and I called it preference. He looked back up. I don't know if I've changed. I don't know if I'm capable of... Caleb. Her voice was quiet and direct. I'm not her. Something loosened in his chest, slow and irreversible. No, he said. You're not. And I'm not asking you to be different than you are. I'm not asking you to be easier or more open or anything other than what you already are. She leaned forward slightly. I'm just asking you to let me be here. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, Will you marry me? She held his gaze with those steady eyes. Is that the legal solution or the question? That's the question, he said. The legal solution can wait until you answer the question. She breathed once, slowly. Yes, she said. They were married the following Tuesday. Reverend Alcott, who had already ridden out to the north pasture to document the moved markers, as Caleb had asked, performed the ceremony in his office with Sarah as witness, and Tom Briggs standing in the back, trying to look like a man who hadn't been hoping for exactly this outcome since approximately day 2. It was not a large wedding. There were no flowers beyond the small bunch Sarah had picked from somewhere and pressed into Anna's hands at the door. There were no guests beyond the 4 of them. There was no reception, no celebration, no long afternoon of congratulations. What there was, Anna, in her best dress, which was clean and pressed, and not the faded blue traveling dress, but a deep green that she'd had folded at the bottom of her suitcase, and Caleb in his good shirt. And the words said plainly, and meant plainly, and the specific silence of 2 people in a small room, saying things that matter to each other in front of a man of God and meaning every syllable. When Alcott said you may. And Caleb leaned toward her. Anna put her hand on his jaw, just for a moment, just briefly, and looked at him with something so unguarded in her eyes that he forgot for a moment that anyone else was in the room. Then Tom Briggs cleared his throat very loudly, and Sarah made a sound that was distinctly tearful, and trying not to be, and the moment became something they would both keep privately. On the steps of the church afterward, Sarah hugged Anna for a long time. Anna held on and let herself be held, and Caleb watched his sister and his wife standing on the steps of a church in Raven Creek, and felt something settle deep in his chest. Not loud, not dramatic, just solid like a stone finding its place. Tom shook his hand. 4 days, he said. Don't. That's what you said. 4 days. Tom? I'm just noting it for historical accuracy. Go back to the ranch. Tom grinned and went to get his horse, and Caleb looked back at Anna and Sarah. And Sarah was saying something in Anna's ear that made Anna laugh a real laugh. Not the almost laugh or the held-back smile, but a full, warm laugh that went all the way up, and Caleb thought he would like to be the reason for that laugh as often as possible, for as long as possible, for whatever time was given to them. Victor Hale's response to the marriage arrived in the form of his attorney, a man named Prescott, who appeared at the ranch 3 days later with a revised legal argument and the particular smoothness of someone who charges by the hour and has learned to make bad news sound like information. The standing issue is resolved. Prescott acknowledged setting his bag on the table with careful precision. However, my client's survey petition still has merit independent of the documents your wife submitted. The physical marker evidence was placed there by your client's men, Anna said. Prescott looked at her. He had the look of a man recalibrating a woman at the table he had been expecting to treat as furniture, who had just spoken in complete authoritative sentences. Mrs. Dawson, he said with the particular courtesy that means the opposite of courtesy, your documents allege. My documents don't allege anything, she said very calmly. They demonstrate. There's a difference. She opened the file in front of her. The survey markers were moved on the same day Mr. Hale visited this property, and the same afternoon his man Mercer detained my husband in town. We have a witness, Reverend Alcott, whom I believe your client respects, who documented the markers in their current position and can testify to their placement relative to the original deed boundaries. We have Pete Warren, an employee of this ranch, who observed your client's men in the act of moving them. She looked up at Prescott. What we don't have is any evidence that those markers were ever in any position other than where they stand in the original deed records, which means your physical evidence was manufactured, which means your survey petition is fraudulent. Prescott was quiet. Furthermore, she said, turning to the next page, the ledger discrepancies I documented show a pattern of financial interference that began 18 months ago, coinciding directly with Gerald Webb's arrival, who was recommended by Chester Bird, who is known to be closely associated with your client's operation. Taken together, the financial fraud, the manufactured survey evidence, and the timing of your client's escalating pressure represent a coordinated attempt to acquire this property under duress. She closed the file. That's not a land dispute, Mr. Prescott. That's criminal conspiracy. The room was very quiet. Tom, standing in the doorway, was looking at Anna with the expression of a man watching something extraordinary and trying to memorize it for later. Prescott straightened his papers. He was a careful man, and careful men don't show their responses immediately. But Caleb had been watching people his whole life, and he could see the recalculation happening behind the attorney's composed face. The realization that he had walked into this ranch expecting to manage a rancher and had instead found someone who had done the homework. Mrs. Dawson, Prescott said, you're making serious allegations. I'm making documented ones, she said. The serious part is your client's problem, not mine. Prescott looked at Caleb. Man to man. The last available angle. Caleb looked back at him. She speaks for this ranch, he said. Same as me. Prescott picked up his bag. I'll convey your position to my client, he said. Please do, Anna said. When he was gone, Tom exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath. Mrs. Dawson, he said, I have never in my life been so glad to be on someone's side. Anna was still looking at the closed door. Then she looked at her hands, and he saw the slight tremor in them, the adrenaline settling out that she had been holding back the whole time Prescott was in the room. Are you all right? Caleb said. I'm fine. She looked up, saw his expression. I know you know what that means when I say it. It means you're running on 3 hours of sleep and your hands are shaking. That's a more accurate description, yes. She pressed her hands flat on the table to steady them. Did I go too far? The conspiracy allegation that's aggressive, if we can't substantiate it. You can substantiate it. Most of it. The Webb-Bird-Hale connection is circumstantial. Circumstantial is still something. He sat down across from her. And Prescott knows it. Did you see his face? She had. She'd been watching it the whole time. He wasn't expecting it, she said. No. Hale sent him here to pressure us into dropping the challenge. He didn't brief his attorney on what we actually had. Which means Hale didn't know what we had either. They looked at each other across the table, and the recognition passed between them. The same recognition, the same moment that Victor Hale, for all his 3 years of careful architecture, had not accounted for Anna Whitfield. He thought I was a complication, she said. He thought you were a mail-order bride who'd be gone in 4 days. He was wrong on both counts. She said it simply without triumph. Just accuracy. Caleb reached across the table and put his hand over hers, the one that was still trembling slightly, and kept it there. She looked down at his hand, then up at him. Caleb, she said. I want to say something, and I need you to let me finish saying it before you respond. All right, she took a breath. I know what the last week has been. I know it started as a practical arrangement, and then became a legal strategy, and then became... She paused. This. And I know you have things inside you that take time, things from before. I'm not asking you to rush any of it. She kept her eyes on his. But I want you to know that I didn't marry you because of the standing problem. I want to be sure you know that. He looked at her hand under his. He turned it over slowly, until her palm was facing up, and held it properly, and felt her fingers close around his. I know, he said. You do. Anna. He looked up at her. When I asked you, I told you the legal solution could wait until you answered the question. I meant that. He held her gaze. You answered the question. Everything else is paperwork. She looked at him for a long moment. The steadiness in her eyes did something complicated, softened or deepened, or both at once, and she pressed her fingers against his. Everything else is paperwork, she repeated. Welcome to Montana, he said. That got the laugh. The real one. The full one that went all the way up and filled the kitchen with warmth, and Tom in the doorway made the discreet decision to go check on the horses, and the kitchen belonged to the two of them. For a moment, just them and the papers, and the afternoon light, and the solid, simple, undecorated fact of two people who had found each other across the length of a country and 5 days, and a considerable amount of chaos. Greg, Victor Hale came himself that evening. Not his attorney, not Mercer. Hale himself on his gray horse at the gate just before dark, and this time there was something different in his bearing, something that Caleb read immediately, as a man who has received a report he didn't anticipate and has come to assess the situation with his own eyes. Caleb met him at the gate. Hale looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the house, at the lit windows, at the smoke from the kitchen where Anna was making supper and Sarah was staying a second night because she had decided she wasn't quite ready to leave. I heard you got married, Hale said. That's right. Quickly. When you know, you know. Caleb said it flatly, without irony. Hale looked at him. Prescott told me about the meeting. Did he? He said your wife is... A pause. The smallest pause, well prepared. She is. Hale was quiet for a moment. He had the look of a man reassessing a situation from the ground up, taking in new information, and measuring it against the plan he'd been running for 3 years. The conspiracy allegation, he said. She can't prove that. Are you sure? Webb is in Oregon. Is he? Caleb kept his face neutral. You know that with confidence. Something moved in Hale's expression, something that was not quite certainty. Caleb, he said, and his voice shifted, dropped, the formal edge went for something more personal, more man-to-man. I've known you for 12 years. This land, your father's land, I've made you a fair offer. 3 times. I'm not trying to steal from you. I'm trying to build something in this valley, and I need the northern boundary to do it. That's the truth of it. The truth of it, Caleb said, includes Gerald Webb, and $472 and survey markers that moved themselves. Hale was quiet. You have 2 choices, Caleb said. His voice was even. Not angry past angry. Settled. The voice of a man who knows where he stands. You can let your attorney fight this in court, and Anna will take everything she has to a territorial judge, and you can explain Gerald Webb and Chester Bird and why your men were on my land moving markers the same afternoon your man was keeping me busy in town. He paused. Or you can drop the survey petition, pull it today, and we'll let the ledger discrepancies sit where they are, because I want this finished more than I want to fight. Hale looked at him for a long moment. And the money, he said. The money that's missing from your accounts. My wife has documented it thoroughly, Caleb said. What I do with that documentation is my decision, and my decision will depend significantly on what you decide in the next 48 hours. It was not a threat. It was a fact, and Hale was a man who understood facts. He sat on his gray horse for a long moment. He looked at the house again, at the windows, at the smoke from the chimney, at everything Caleb Dawson had built on land that Victor Hale had spent 3 years trying to take. Your wife, Hale said finally. She came off a train a week ago. She did. And in 1 week, He stopped. In 1 week, Caleb said, she saw what needed seeing. Hale looked at him. Whatever was in his expression then was complicated, not quite respect, but the precursor to it the moment before a man decides that something he underestimated was worth taking seriously. He turned the gray horse. 48 hours, he said. He rode away. Caleb stood at the gate and watched him go, and felt the solid, specific weight of a man who knows the fight isn't over, but has just watched it shift. The advantage had moved. Not completely. Not finally, but it had moved, and he knew it, and more importantly, Victor Hale knew it. He turned back toward the house. Through the kitchen window, he could see Anna moving the lamplight, the familiar shape of her at the stove, and Sarah's laugh carrying through the glass, and for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure. The light in his windows looked like something that was meant to be there. He walked back to the house. He went inside. The kitchen smelled like whatever Anna was cooking, and like coffee, and like Sarah's particular brand of cheerful stubbornness, and General the cat was sitting on the windowsill in a patch of warm air, looking moderately satisfied, which was as close to approval as the animal ever got. Anna looked up when he came in. Well, 48 hours, he said. She searched his face for a moment. Then she nodded once turned back to the stove. Supper's almost ready. Good. Caleb. He stopped. What you said to him just now, she said without turning around. Whatever it was. How do you know what I said? I know how you talk to people. She kept her back to him, stirring. Thank you. He looked at the back of her head, at the way her hair was coming loose from its pin, the way it always did by late in the day, at the particular way she stood at his stove, like she had been standing at it for years rather than days. Thank you, he said back, for being worth saying it about. Sarah made a sound from the corner that was unmistakably the sound of someone trying not to cry into a coffee cup. Tom, who had materialized from nowhere in the back doorway, said, I'm just here for the food. And the evening came down warm around all of them, and the kitchen held them all, and outside, the Montana night went wide and deep, as it always did, as it always had, as it would go on doing long after everything else had changed. But inside the house, for the first time in 8 years, Caleb Dawson was not alone in the dark, and he had stopped being afraid of that. Victor Hale pulled the survey petition on the 41st hour, not the 48th, the 41st, which told Caleb everything he needed to know about the state of Victor Hale's confidence in his own position. A man who pulls 11 hours early is not a man who thought he had 48 hours of options left to consider. He's a man who spent 41 hours looking at what Anna Whitfield had built on paper and understanding that she would take it apart in front of a territorial judge with the same calm precision she had used on his attorney. Prescott delivered the withdrawal notice in writing. A single paragraph. Formal, bloodless, giving no reason. Anna read it twice. Then she set it on the table and looked at Caleb. "It's done?" she said. "Not entirely." He sat down. "The money. Webb." "Yes." She folded her hands. "That's still there." They had talked about it the night before, after Sarah had gone home, and Tom had turned in, and the house had gone quiet around them. Caleb had laid out what he was thinking, and Anna had listened and asked 2 questions, and then said what she thought directly, the way she always did, and they had reached the same place from 2 different directions. "I want to go to the sheriff," Caleb said. "Not because I want to destroy Hale. Because Webb stole from me, and I want that on record." And Hale. Hale pulled his petition. He knows what I have, and he knows I know what he did. That's going to sit with him every day he drives past this land, and it's still mine. Caleb looked at the withdrawal notice. A man like Victor Hale losing quietly, that's its own punishment. Anna looked at him for a moment. "You could push harder. The conspiracy case could take 2 years, cost more than the money Webb took, and spend the next 2 years of our lives in legal proceedings instead of building something." He met her eyes. "Is that what you want?" She thought about it honestly. He had learned that about her she didn't answer immediately when the question deserved more than an immediate answer. She thought, and then she said what she actually meant. "No," she said. "It isn't." She paused. "But I want to be sure you're not choosing peace because you're tired of fighting. There's a difference between letting something go and giving something up." "I know the difference." "Then tell me which one this is." He looked at her steadily. "I have what I wanted to keep. The ranch is clear. The petition is gone. And I have—" He stopped for just a moment. "More than I had 2 weeks ago. More than I had any right to expect." He held her gaze. "That's not tired. That's knowing when you've won." She looked at him for a long moment with that careful, steady attention that still caught him off guard. Sometimes the specific quality of someone who is actually looking at you rather than at the version of you they've decided to see. "All right," she said. "Then we go to the sheriff, document Webb, put it on record, and then we're done with Victor Hale." "Done with Victor Hale," he agreed. She reached across the table and picked up the withdrawal notice and added it to the file she'd been building since the first night with the ledger, placed it neatly at the front where a judge or a sheriff or anyone who needed to understand the sequence of events could find it immediately, and closed the folder with the quiet finality of someone filing something away for good. "Caleb," she said. I want to write to the agency in Boston." He looked up. "I want to tell them what happened," she said. "Not the Hale situation, that's not their concern, but I want them to know that the arrangement—" She paused, looked for the right word, "resolved differently than expected." She looked at him with something a little careful in her expression. "I want them to know I'm not coming back." He held her gaze. "Write the letter," he said. Something released in her face. Small but real. The particular relief of someone who had been carrying a door left open that they were finally allowed to close. "I'll write it today," she said. Sheriff Dale Pittman had been law in Raven Creek for 11 years and had the particular quality of a man who had heard a great many stories and developed an excellent sense for which ones were real. He listened to Caleb lay out the Webb situation with the ledger documentation Anna had prepared, asked 4 questions, took the folder, and spent 20 minutes reading through it in silence, while Caleb and Anna sat across from his desk. Then he set the folder down and looked at Anna. "You put this together," he said. "Yes, all of it. The cross-reference, the handwriting comparison, the timeline. Yes. Pittman looked at the folder again, then at Caleb. Your wife, she do this kind of work professionally. She did, Caleb said. She still does, Anna said. Both men looked at her. She looked back at them with her chin level. I'm still capable of doing it. The firm in Boston is gone, but the skill isn't. She paused. If there's ever a need in Raven Creek for someone who can read accounts and find things that don't add up, I'd like to be considered. Pittman looked at the folder one more time. Mrs. Dawson, he said, I have 3 open fraud cases I can't make heads or tails of. I don't have a budget for a professional, but I have considerable flexibility about what I call a community resource. He looked at her. Would you be available for occasional consultation? Anna looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Anna. She would, he said. I would, she said simultaneously. Pittman almost smiled. He was a man who kept his smiles in reserve, but this one got a little closer to the surface than usual. I'll open a file on Webb, he said. Oregon's a long way, but there are marshals. I make no promises about resolution, but it goes on the record today. That's all I'm asking, Caleb said. They stood and shook hands, and Pittman walked them to the door, and then said without particular ceremony, Mr. Dawson, I've been watching Hale operate in this valley for 7 years, and I've been waiting for someone to give me something solid enough to do anything about it. He glanced down at the folder in his hand. This isn't everything, but it's a start. He looked up. You might want to know that. Caleb looked at him. I might. Good day, Mrs. Dawson. Good day, Sheriff. They came out into the street and stood for a moment in the mid-morning, and the town ran around them at its ordinary pace, and Caleb looked at Anna standing beside him on the boardwalk of Raven Creek, with the Wyoming sun making everything sharp and clear, and he thought about a train platform and $65 and a speech he had prepared and never delivered. That went well, Anna said. It did. The consultation offer surprised me. It didn't surprise me. She glanced at him sideways. Why not? Because anyone who spends 5 minutes looking at what you put together in that folder knows exactly what they're looking at. He said it plainly the way he said everything. Pittman's been around long enough to know what's useful. She absorbed that. She was still learning how he gave compliments direct, undecorated, delivered, and then not dwelt on. It was different from anything she'd encountered before. She was finding she preferred it. I'd like to take the consultation work, she said, if it comes. I know. You don't mind. He looked at her. Anna, you found $472 of theft in a ledger in 20 minutes. You challenged a fraudulent land petition in a records office. You faced down a corporate attorney at my kitchen table. He kept his eyes on hers. Why would I mind you using those skills? Some men would. I'm not some men. She held his gaze. No, she said. You're not. They stood on the boardwalk for a moment, in the particular warmth of a morning that had just settled something. Then Anna said, Can we stop at the general store? I need flour. And I want to look at whether they carry the same seed catalog as the one I saw advertised in the Billings paper. Seed catalog. I've been thinking about the kitchen garden. There's space on the south side of the house that gets good light and isn't being used. Tom said you've talked about it but never done anything about it. Tom talks too much. Tom is a valuable source of information about this ranch. She was already moving toward the general store. He told me about the fence you've been meaning to repair for a year, and the roof section over the equipment barn that leaks, and the fact that you've been buying your feed from the same overpriced supplier for 6 years out of pure stubbornness. Caleb fell into step beside her. He told you about the roof. He told me about all of it. He was very thorough. She pushed open the general store door and looked back at him. Tom is deeply invested in this ranch improving. Tom is deeply invested in having someone to agree with him about my stubbornness. He has excellent taste, she said, and went inside. The letter from Gerald Webb arrived 6 weeks later. It came not to Caleb, but to Sheriff Pittman, forwarded through a marshal's contact in Portland. Webb had not gone to Oregon, but to Oregon's neighbor, a detail that turned out to matter, and Pittman brought it to the ranch himself on a Thursday afternoon, which told Caleb before he read a word that whatever was in it was significant. He read it at the kitchen table with Anna beside him. Webb had written 4 pages in the cramped, slightly desperate handwriting of a man who had spent 2 months understanding that his situation was not going to improve with time. He admitted to the ledger fraud. He admitted that Chester Bird had connected him to Hale's foreman. He admitted that the survey reassessment application had been filed at Hale's direction, that he had been paid $200 to do it, and that he had been told the land dispute would be resolved before anyone looked too closely at the books. He had not expected, he wrote, that anyone would look at the books. He named names, dates, amounts, the specific conversations in which Hale's foreman had given him instructions. Caleb put the letter down. Pittman, sitting across from him with his hat on his knee, said, "That's a conspiracy to defraud, not circumstantial anymore." Anna was very still beside Caleb. He could feel her processing it the same way she processed everything, fast and precise and without drama, and then she said, "Webb turned. He's scared of where this goes if he doesn't cooperate." "That's my read," Pittman said. "What does this mean for Hale?" Caleb said. Pittman looked at the letter. "It means I have enough to bring it to the territorial prosecutor. Whether he pursues it is his decision, but the file is solid now." He looked up at Caleb. "I told you it was a start." Caleb sat back in his chair. He thought about Victor Hale on his gray horse at the gate, about 3 years of patience, about the machine built to take a ranch away from a man who had built it with his own hands and his father's before him, about the particular cruelty of a plan that used loyalty against itself, trusting a sister's recommendation, trusting a foreman, trusting the people around him. "What do you need from us?" Anna said. "Affidavits confirming the ledger work. The originals, not the copies." Pittman looked at her. "And your availability to explain the accounting evidence, if it goes to a formal proceeding." "You have it," she said. Pittman stood. He put on his hat. He looked around the kitchen at the clean windows and the ordered shelves and the kitchen garden, visible through the back window that Anna had planted 3 weeks ago, and was already showing green with the expression of a man noting the difference between a place he's visited before and what it has become. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "when you came in that day to file the challenge at the records office, Pruitt told me about it. He said he'd never seen anyone come in off the street and cut to the center of a land fraud case in under 10 minutes. Anna looked at him carefully. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." He picked up the letter. "This valley is better for having you in it." He walked to the door and stopped. "I'll be in touch." He left. Caleb and Anna sat in the kitchen in the quiet, his departure left behind. Outside, Tom was doing something in the yard that involved considerable noise, and General, the cat, was sitting on the back step, looking offended by it. "Hale might actually face charges," Anna said. "He might. Does that change anything for you?" Caleb thought about it. "No. The ranch is clear either way. The petition is gone." He looked at the letter on the table. "What Hale faces now is between him and the law. I gave Pittman what I had. The rest isn't mine to drive." She nodded slowly. "That's the right way to think about it." "Is that what you think?" "Yes." She looked at him. "I've been carrying anger about what happened to the textile firm in Boston for 3 years. The man who engineered its collapse never faced any consequences. He bought the assets cheap at auction and made a profit." She paused. "I don't know what would have happened to me if I'd spent 3 years trying to pursue him legally. I suspect I'd have spent everything I had and ended up in the same place only 3 years later, and emptier." She picked up the Webb letter and put it in the file with the other documents. Letting something go isn't the same as losing. Sometimes it's how you keep what matters. Caleb looked at her. "You said that to me once before," he said. "About something else." "Loyalty and stubbornness," she said. "The feed supplier." "I changed suppliers." "I know. I placed the order." The corner of her mouth moved. 17% savings in the first month." "You said 18. 17.4. I was rounding generously." She closed the file. "You're welcome." He almost smiled. You're going to be insufferable about that for years. I'm going to be accurate about it for years, she corrected. Whether that's insufferable is your interpretation. The territorial hearing happened 8 weeks later. Victor Hale did not attend. His attorney appeared in his place and entered a series of filings that the prosecutor described in Caleb's presence as an attempt to make a straightforward case complicated enough that everyone got tired and went home. It was, the prosecutor said, a classic Hale approach. What Hale had not accounted for was Anna's documentation. She had organized it for the hearing, the same way she organized everything, with the clear logic of someone who understands that a judge reading 40 pages of evidence has about 12 minutes of patience for complexity before they start looking for the simplest possible explanation. She had made it simple. Timeline, evidence, pattern, conclusion. Each step supported each claim, documented each connection, traced. The judge took the file home overnight. He came back the next morning and spent 6 minutes issuing his findings. Gerald Webb's survey reassessment, filed while Webb was acting as an agent of Hale Ranch and simultaneously defrauding the Dawson property, was declared void. The boundary petition filed by Hale's attorney was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could not be refiled. The financial fraud case was referred to the federal marshal's office, given Webb's location and the interstate nature of the scheme. Victor Hale, the judge, noted, in the language of someone choosing his words very carefully, appeared to have coordinated activities that warranted further investigation, the details of which were being forwarded to the appropriate federal office. It was not a conviction, but it was the beginning of one. Caleb walked out of the territorial courthouse into the afternoon light with Anna beside him and Pittman a step behind, and he stopped on the courthouse steps and felt something settle through him, from his shoulders all the way down. The releasing of a tension he had been carrying so long, he had stopped being aware of it as a separate thing. Anna stood beside him and didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "All right." "All right," he said. She took his hand. She did it quietly, the way she did everything. Not a gesture for an audience, just a choice. Her fingers finding his on the courthouse steps in the Montana afternoon. He held on. Pittman came up beside them, looked at the street, looked at the file under his arm and said, "Mrs. Dawson, the federal case is going to need your documentation submitted formally." "I'll have it ready by Friday," she said. "Monday's fine." "Friday," she said. Pittman looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back at him with the expression of a man who had stopped trying to negotiate Anna's timelines. "Friday." Pittman agreed and walked away, shaking his head in the particular manner of a man who finds something genuinely impressive but has decided to process it privately. Hunt. The thing about a life, Caleb thought, was that it didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive like a train on a schedule. It didn't stand on a platform and declare itself. It built itself in the spaces between things in a kitchen at 4 a.m. and a ledger on a table, and the sound of another person moving through a house that had been quiet for too long. Autumn came down hard and fast, the way it always did in Montana, and the ranch moved into its seasonal rhythm, the wood stacking and the cattle moving and the fence repairs that were finally actually getting done because Anna had put them on a list and assigned them to Tom with the specific firmness of someone who treated a list as a contract. Tom, to his own apparent surprise, found this more motivating than Caleb's more general approach of pointing at things that needed doing and trusting they would eventually get done. "She made me a schedule," Tom told Caleb one morning by the barn, in the tone of a man reporting something he can't entirely explain. "I have a schedule now, for the week. It has boxes. Boxes. That you check, when you finish something." Tom looked at his hands. "It's extremely satisfying." Caleb looked at him. "She got to you too." "She got to everyone, boss." Tom said it with the simple honesty of a man who has accepted a fundamental change in his world. General follows her around now. The barn cat that hasn't followed anyone in 6 years follows her to the chicken coop every morning like a dog. She talks to him. "I know, I've heard her." Tom paused. He talks back. He makes sounds. He makes sounds specifically at her. That's talking back. Caleb looked toward the house where Anna was visible through the kitchen window, doing something at the counter with the particular efficient focus she brought to every task. The kitchen garden, which Tom had been telling him for 3 years to plant, and which he had been planning to get around to, was visible through the back window. Now the last of the autumn plants still standing in their rows, and inside the house were curtains that hadn't been there before, and a braided rug by the front door, and a shelf of books that had arrived in 2 packages from a bookseller in Billings that Anna had ordered without ceremony, and arranged one evening while Caleb was doing the evening chores. He had come inside and stopped, and looked at the books, and looked at the rug, and looked at the curtains moving in the window draft, and he had felt the specific feeling of a man standing in a house that has become a home and being unable to identify the moment the transformation happened. He had gone to find Anna, and she was in the kitchen making coffee, and he had stood in the doorway and said, "The books." And she had said, "I hope that's all right. I can put them somewhere else if you'd rather." And he had said, "No. Where they are is right." And she had looked at him with that careful steadiness and said, "Good," and handed him his coffee. That was how it went between them. Not declarations, not ceremonies. Small moments, practical and close, that added up to something that was, he had come to understand, the most solid thing he had ever built. In the 3rd month of their marriage, Sarah came to supper on a Sunday, and brought with her the woman who ran the women's auxiliary at the church, a Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, who arrived with a covered dish and the transparent agenda of a woman who has decided something needs to be done and has come to do it. What Mrs. Whitmore had decided needed to be done was that Anna Whitfield Dawson needed to be formally introduced to the women of Raven Creek, and that the vehicle for this should be the auxiliary's winter charity drive, for which they needed someone to organize the accounts, which had been in a state of what Mrs. Whitmore described as creative disorder since the previous treasurer moved to Bozeman. She put this proposal to Anna over supper, with the careful approach of a woman who had done this kind of asking before, and knew it required a certain amount of diplomatic scaffolding. Anna listened to the entire proposal. Then she said, "I'd be glad to help. When do you need the books?" Mrs. Whitmore blinked. She had been prepared for considerably more negotiation. "This Tuesday, perhaps, if that's convenient." "Tuesday is fine." Anna looked at Sarah. "You're on the auxiliary, secretary," Sarah said, with the slight defensiveness of someone who knows they have been outmaneuvered by their own arrangement but can't quite identify when. "Good, you can show me the filing system." Mrs. Whitmore looked at Caleb with the expression of someone who has just received something better than what they asked for and isn't entirely sure what to do about the surplus. "Your wife," she said carefully, "is very decisive." "She is," Caleb said. "I mean that as a compliment." "I know." Anna looked at him sideways across the table, and he looked back at her with a steadiness that said several things without saying any of them. And Mrs. Whitmore watched this quiet exchange with the knowing attention of a woman who has been observing marriages for 50 years and knows exactly what she's seeing. She did not comment on it. She had excellent manners. But on the way home that evening, she told Sarah Dawson that her brother had found something remarkable. And Sarah agreed with the particular satisfaction of someone who had sent a letter to an agency in Boston 14 months ago and had been told repeatedly that she had overstepped and had turned out to be right in a way that exceeded everything she'd dared to hope. The letter from the federal marshal's office arrived on a Thursday morning in late November. Caleb opened it at breakfast and read it and set it on the table and looked at it for a moment. Anna looked at his face. "What does it say?" Gerald Webb entered a formal statement to the federal marshal's office in Portland, full accounting of everything: his relationship with Bird, the instructions from Hale's foreman, the survey application, the ledger entries. Caleb looked up. "The federal marshal is opening a formal investigation into Hale for land fraud across 3 counties. Apparently we're not the only ones." Anna was still. "3 counties," she said. "We were the first to put it together formally. Pittman shared the documentation with 2 other sheriffs who had been seeing similar patterns." He looked at the letter. "The documentation you built, they're using it as the template to review the other cases." She sat with that for a moment. "How many properties?" she said quietly. He looked at the letter again. They're still counting, at least 6. She closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, they were very steady and very clear. Then it wasn't just us. No. He'd been doing this for years. Looks that way. She looked at the letter. Then she looked at her hands flat on the table. Those other people, she said. The other properties. Some of them probably didn't have someone who could read the books. No, Caleb said. Probably not. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I want to help. With the other cases. If Pittman or the marshals need the documentation reviewed if there are other ledgers. I know, he said. Will you mind the time it would take? Anna. His voice was gentle and absolute. I told you the day you asked about the consultation work. I'm telling you again now. He held her gaze. Use what you have. This is exactly the kind of thing it's for. She looked at him. You came here for a new beginning, he said. She had heard him say those words several times over the months, and each time they had meant something slightly different, tracked by how much the life between them had grown. This time they landed as what they actually were. Not a question anymore, not a thing he was circling or working toward, but a statement of fact about what she had found. Yes, she said. I did. Is this it? She looked at him across the breakfast table in the morning light in the kitchen of the house where she had first opened a ledger 6 months ago, with her hands still trembling from the train journey, and 40 cents in her pocket, and a heart that had been prepared for disappointment and had received against all reasonable expectation something entirely different. She thought about the train platform, about the tear she had wiped away before he could see it properly, about I'm fine, and the way she had learned to say it, and the way she had slowly stopped needing to. She thought about the letter she had written to the Boston agency, telling them she was not coming back, and how it had felt to put that letter in the mail, and how the feeling had been not loss, but the particular lightness of a door closing cleanly behind you, when you know the room you've walked into is where you belong. She thought about General the cat on the back step, and Tom's schedule with the boxes, and Sarah's laugh in the kitchen, and Reverend Alcott witnessing a quiet ceremony in his office, and Elias Pruitt reading her ledger summaries over his spectacles with slowly shifting respect, and Sheriff Pittman saying, "This valley is better for having you in it." She thought about a man who had driven 3 hours down from a mountain to send her away, and had caught her when she fell and fed her at Ida May's, and given her a room and a ledger, and 41 hours to be believed in before he said anything about it out loud. She thought about the way he held her hand on the courthouse steps. Not for anyone watching, just because it was true. "Yes," she said. "This is it." He nodded once, the way he nodded when something was settled. Then he picked up his coffee and looked at the federal letter and said, "I'll call Pittman today. Let him know you're available." "After the auxiliary accounts," she said. "I told Mrs. Whitmore Tuesday." "The auxiliary first." "The auxiliary first." She picked up her own coffee. "There's an order to things." Outside, Tom's voice carried from the yard something directed at the day workers about the north fence. The fence that was finally properly actually fixed, and General was doing his morning circuit of the property, with the satisfaction of an animal who has decided that this particular territory meets his standards, and the autumn light was coming through the kitchen window. The way it had been coming through that window for as long as the house had stood, and none of it was different from what it had always been, except that the house was full now, of noise and warmth and work and the specific irreplaceable weight of two people who had found each other across the length of a country and the width of everything they'd each survived to get here. Caleb Dawson had come to that train platform with $65 and a plan to be alone. Anna Whitfield had stepped off that train with 40 cents and one last hope. Between the two of them, they had built something neither had known how to ask for, not because fate arranged it or luck delivered it, but because two people, with enough courage and enough honesty, had looked at each other clearly without pretense or performance, and chosen. That was the whole of it. That was everything. And on a cold Thursday morning in late November in Raven Creek, Montana, With the federal letter on the table, and the coffee going warm in their hands, and the life they had made running full and real around them, it was more than enough. It was exactly right.